It was his voice. That is the part she keeps coming back to. Not the money, not the lawyer. The voice. It was his voice. Scared, shaking, calling her the name only he ever used. She wired the first $9,000 before the sun came up. By the end of the week, it was over $300,000, $312,000. Her savings, her late husband's pension, and the house they paid off in 1994. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. While it was happening, her real grandson was texting her, calling her, begging her to pick up. And she ignored every message because the people on the phone had told her to. She thought she was saving him. He was never in danger. So who was she really talking to? And how does a woman who balanced her checkbook by hand for 50 years lose everything in 4 days to a grandson who was sitting in his own apartment the entire time? Her name was Marlene Cooper, and she did exactly what any loving grandmother would do. That was the whole trap. Marlene Cooper was 77 years old, and she had spent her life being the steady one. For 31 years, she was a school librarian in Cedar Glen, a quiet suburb outside a mid-sized Midwestern city. She knew every child's name. She knew which ones needed a quiet place at lunch and which ones just needed someone to ask how they were doing. She retired with a modest pension, a paid-off house, and a reputation as the most organized person anyone knew. Her husband Frank had been a maintenance supervisor for the county. He passed away 4 years before any of this began. After he died, Marlene did what careful people do. She consolidated. She kept good records. She had a single checking account, a savings account she'd built over decades, Frank's pension survivor benefit, and a retirement account she barely touched because, as she liked to say, that money was for emergencies and for the grandkids. The grandkids. That was the soft center of everything. She had two. And the one she worried about, the one she loved with a particular ache, was Jordan. Jordan Hale, her daughter Diane's boy. 23 years old, living 3 states away, finishing up a degree and trying to make something of himself online, Jordan made videos. Gaming videos, mostly. The kind Marlene didn't fully understand but watched anyway. Every single one, because hearing him talk made her feel close to him. That detail matters more than anyone realized at the time. Because Jordan's voice, his laugh, his cadence, the way he said grandma with the emphasis on the first syllable, was sitting out in the open. Hours of it. Free for anyone to take. Marlene was not naive. She was not confused. She read the paper. She knew scams existed. She had even hung up on a robocall about her car's extended warranty the week before and told Diane about it, laughing. She was, in every way the world measures these things, a sharp, capable, careful woman, which is exactly why this story should frighten you. Because being careful was not enough. Being smart was not enough. The thing that got her was not a weakness. It was a strength. It was love. The call came at 5:42 inches the morning. Marlene was an early riser, always had been. But a phone ringing before 6 still meant only one thing to a woman her age. Something was wrong. She picked up on the second ring. The voice on the other end was crying, "Grandma?" And here is where the trap was already sprung, because she answered the way any grandmother would. She didn't wait to confirm who it was. She filled in the blank herself. The fear in her own chest answered for her. "Jordan? Honey, is that you? What's wrong?" According to what Marlene later told investigators, the voice said yes. It said his name. It used the emphasis she knew. It told her he was in trouble, that he'd been in a car accident, that he was so sorry, that his nose was broken and that's why he sounded different, and that he was scared. He'd been driving home late, the voice said. There had been an accident. Another car. Another driver hurt. and the police had found something a friend had left, something in the car. The voice was vague, panicked, and now Jordan had been arrested. He was in a holding cell. He was allowed one call, and he had called her. Not his mother, her. "Please don't tell Mom," the voice said. "Please, Grandma. She'll be so disappointed. Let me fix this first. Please." Stop and think about how perfectly that single sentence works. It does three things at once. It isolates her from the one person who would have caught this in 30 seconds. Her own daughter, Jordan's mother. It frames secrecy as protection, as love, as something a good grandmother does for a grandson she adores. And it puts Marlene on a team. Her and Jordan, against the world, keeping a secret to spare the family pain. That is not an accident. That is the architecture of the scam. The phrase, "don't tell anyone," is not embarrassment. It is the lock on the door. Marlene agreed. Of course she agreed. He was scared, and he had come to her. Then the voice said it had to go. The guard was coming, but that a lawyer would call her, a public defender named Mr. Brennan, and that Mr. Brennan would explain everything. And then the line went dead. She sat in her kitchen in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for the phone to ring again. Now, before we go further, understand what had actually happened in those 90 seconds. Because the mechanism is the entire point of this channel. The voice on the phone was not Jordan. Jordan was asleep in his own bed 3 states away. The voice was a synthetic reproduction, what people now call a voice clone. The technology to do this has become disturbingly accessible. It does not require a hacker or a stolen phone. It requires a sample of someone's voice. A few seconds of clear audio is often enough. And where do you get clear audio of a 23-year-old who posts videos online for an audience? You get it anywhere. You download it. The criminals did not break into anything. They did not steal a password. They listened to a grandson talk to a camera, the way he had 1,000 times, and they used that to build a key to his grandmother's heart. The broken nose line is the giveaway. In hindsight, it is a script. It exists to explain away any imperfection in the clone, any wrong word, any strange pause. If the voice doesn't sound exactly right, well, his nose is broken. He's crying. He's terrified. The story patches its own holes. Marlene had no way to know any of this. She heard her grandson, in pain, asking for help. Her body believed it before her mind could question it. The phone rang again at 6:10. The man introduced himself as Mr. Brennan, a public defender assigned to Jordan's case. He was calm, professional, a little tired sounding, exactly the way you'd imagine an overworked court lawyer at 6 in the morning. According to Marlene's later account, he did not rush her. He was patient. He explained the situation in measured official language, and that calm was its own kind of weapon, because it made everything that followed sound like procedure instead of theft. Jordan had been arrested following an accident, Mr. Brennan said. The other driver had been hospitalized. There was a complication involving a controlled substance found in the vehicle, not Jordan's, he stressed. But the police didn't know that yet. The good news, he said, was that the judge had set a low initial bail because Jordan had no record. The bad news was that bail had to be posted in cash that morning, before the arraignment, or Jordan would be held for up to 72 hours in the county facility, with the other charges pending. The amount was $9,800. A courier, Mr. Brennan said, could come to her home within the hour to collect it because the court's payment window closed at 9 and there wasn't time for anything else. He apologized for the unusual arrangement. He said he knew how it sounded. He said he wished the system worked better. That apology, "I know how this sounds," is not a slip. It is a tool. By naming her doubt before she could, he disarmed it. A real con artist does not avoid the thing that seems suspicious. He says it out loud first, so that when you feel it, it feels like something you've already discussed and moved past. Marlene asked the only question that occurred to her. Could she just talk to Jordan again? Mr. Brennan said no, not until after the arraignment. Inmates didn't have phone access during processing, but that Jordan had asked him to tell her he loved her and was so sorry. She had $9,800 in her savings account. She drove to her bank when it opened at 8, withdrew the cash, and here we reached the first place this could have been stopped. The teller asked what the cash was for. It is a question banks are trained to ask, and Marlene, coached without even realizing she'd been coached, said it was for a home repair, a new roof. She'd been quoted that morning. She lied to her own bank. Not because she was foolish, because the people on the phone had built a story in which the bank was an obstacle, the family was a risk, and she was the only one who could save her grandson. Everyone who might have helped her had already been turned into a threat. The courier arrived at 8:50. A polite young man in a dark jacket who took the envelope, gave her a handwritten receipt with a case number on it, and drove away. $9,800 gone. And in Marlene's mind, it was the best money she had ever spent. Her grandson was safe. She felt, for about 2 hours, an enormous relief. The bill was paid. The crisis was handled. She made herself coffee and waited to hear that Jordan was free. Then, a little after 11, Mr. Brennan called back, and his voice was different now, heavier. There had been a development. The other driver, he said, had taken a turn for the worse overnight. The hospital had upgraded the charges. What had been a simple accident was now being treated as a felony, and the prosecutor was talking about serious time. Mr. Brennan said he was sorry. He truly was. But the situation had changed, and Jordan was now facing the possibility of years in prison. But there was a path, he said. There was always a path. The injured driver's family, through their own attorney, had indicated they would be willing to sign what he called a civil settlement and a statement of no further interest, essentially an agreement not to pursue the matter in exchange for compensation for medical costs and lost wages. If that settlement were reached before the arraignment, the prosecutor would very likely reduce the charge to a misdemeanor. Jordan could come home. The felony would disappear. The figure the family's attorney had named was $34,000. And here the scam reveals its true engine. It is not built on a single ask. It is built on the sunk cost of the ask before it. Marlene had already given $9,800. She had already committed. To stop now was not just to lose more money, it was to admit that the first money might have been wasted and to leave her grandson to a fate she could now vividly imagine. Years in prison, for a good boy, for an accident. Every escalation in a scam like this is engineered to make stopping feel more painful than continuing. The deeper in you are, the more it costs to walk away, not in dollars, but in fear and in hope. They are not selling you a service. They are selling you the next 30 seconds of relief, over and over, and charging more each time. Marlene did not have $34,000 in cash sitting around, but she had it. It was in the savings account, and what wasn't there was in the survivor benefit account she rarely touched. Mr. Brennan, ever helpful, explained that a wire transfer would be cleaner this time, faster, traceable, official. He gave her account details for what he called the settlement escrow account and walked her through exactly what to tell the bank if they asked. Say it's for a real estate transaction. Say it's a private purchase. Whatever you do, he said, don't mention the case. Because if word got out that the family was being paid, the whole settlement could collapse and Jordan would lose his only chance. Once again, silence, framed as protection. The wall around her was getting higher. She wired the $34,000 that afternoon. The running total was now $43,800. And she still believed, with all her heart, that she was almost done. If your stomach is already turning, you're not alone, and I have to warn you, this gets considerably worse. If you're already uneasy watching this, hit subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. Now, back to it. The next morning, a new voice entered the story. This one called himself a court liaison, a sort of administrative go-between, he explained, who handled the paperwork between the family, the lawyer, and the court. His name was Mr. Ashford, and he was warmer than Brennan, almost grandfatherly himself, which is its own kind of cruelty when you think about who he was talking to. Mr. Ashford had wonderful news and difficult news. The wonderful news: the settlement had been received, and the injured family had agreed to reduce their demands against Jordan. The difficult news: the prosecutor was still not satisfied. There was the matter of the controlled substance found in the vehicle. Even though it wasn't Jordan's, possession was a separate charge, and to make it go away required what Mr. Ashford called a diversion bond, a payment that would route Jordan into a treatment and dismissal program instead of a trial. With the bond posted, the drug charge would be sealed and eventually expunged. Without it, Jordan was looking at a mandatory minimum. The diversion bond was $60,000. Now we are climbing fast, and notice the pattern, because the pattern is the warning sign you most need to remember. Every single payment solves the last problem and creates a new one. Bail solves the holding cell, but reveals a felony. The settlement solves the felony, but reveals the drug charge. The drug charge requires a bond, which will surely reveal something else. There is no bottom. There was never going to be a bottom. As long as Marlene kept paying, there would always be one more form, one more fee, one more thing standing between her grandson and freedom. A legitimate legal process does not work this way. Bail is set by a court and posted through a clerk's office, not collected by couriers in dark jackets. Settlements are not wired to escrow accounts overnight to downgrade criminal charges. Prosecutors do not negotiate drug possession away in exchange for same-day cash from a defendant's grandmother. None of this is how anything actually works. But Marlene had no reason to know the machinery of the criminal courts. Almost no one does. The scam lives in that ignorance, not stupidity, ignorance. The simple fact that ordinary people have never had to learn how arraignments and bail and diversion programs function. The criminals knew the procedure she didn't, and they used that knowledge to build a maze with no exit. $60,000 was more than Marlene had in liquid savings. To make this payment, she had to move money out of Frank's retirement account, the emergency money, the grandkids' money. She called the brokerage, and there a second alarm could have gone off, because a representative warned her about the tax penalty for an early large withdrawal, and asked gently whether everything was all right. She said everything was fine. She said she was helping with a family expense. She was not lying to be deceptive. She believed it. A family expense, the most important one of her life. She wired the $60,000. The running total was now $103,800. 6 figures in 2 days. And somewhere in those 2 days, her phone had begun to fill with messages she did not read. Because here is what was happening on the other side of the country, in the real world, while Marlene sat in her kitchen feeding a phantom. The real Jordan had woken up to a strange voicemail from his grandmother, left late the night before, in which she said something about being so proud of him for being brave and that everything would be okay and that she hadn't told his mother. He didn't understand it. He called her back. No answer. He texted. No reply. He called Diane, his mom, and asked if Grandma was acting strange. But the scammers had thought of this too. Mr. Ashford had told Marlene, in his warm, grandfatherly way, that scammers sometimes targeted families during legal cases like this, that she might receive calls or texts from people pretending to be Jordan, or even pretending to be his mother, trying to disrupt the settlement. "Do not answer them," he said. "Do not respond. They will say anything to make you doubt the process. The only people you can trust are us." So when her real grandson called, she saw his name on the screen and she let it ring. When her real grandson texted, "Grandma, where are you? Please call me," she read it as the work of the criminals, Mr. Ashford had warned her about, and she did not respond. The scam had inverted her entire world. The people stealing from her were the ones she trusted. The people trying to save her were the ones she'd been told to fear. Her real family, reaching out in genuine alarm, had been pre-labeled as the threat. There is almost nothing more chilling in any of these cases than this. The moment the victim's love is turned into a weapon against the very people who could rescue them. For another full day, it worked. The discovery, when it finally came, did not come from Marlene. It came from Diane. Unable to reach her mother by phone and rattled by the bizarre voicemail, Diane drove the 4 hours to Cedar Glen on the third day. She let herself in with her key around dinner time and found her mother at the kitchen table, gray-faced, surrounded by handwritten notes, case numbers, account numbers, dollar amounts, a name, Mr. Ashford, underlined twice. Diane asked what was going on, and Marlene, who had been holding a secret for 3 days because she thought it was an act of love, finally broke. She said she was so sorry. She said she hadn't wanted to tell her. She said Jordan was in jail and that she was almost done saving him, and that she just needed a little more to finish the settlement. Diane stared at her mother and said the sentence that ended the spell and began the nightmare in the same breath. "Mom, Jordan's at home. I just talked to him an hour ago." Marlene did not understand. She could not understand. She had heard his voice. She had spoken to him. He had cried. He had called her grandma the way he always did. Diane called Jordan, put him on speaker, and had him talk to his grandmother, the real one. And Marlene listened to the same voice she had been hearing for 3 days say the words that should have been a relief and instead detonated her entire life. "Grandma, I've been trying to reach you. I've never been arrested. I've been home the whole time. What happened?" What happened was $312,000. Because we are not there yet. We are only at $103,000. The worst of it had not even left her account. But that is the moment the floor dropped out. That is the moment a careful, intelligent, loving woman understood that she had not saved her grandson. She had been robbed by a machine wearing his face. What came next is where so many of these stories turn from a tragedy into an outrage. Because once the family knew, they did everything right, and the system still failed them at nearly every turn. Diane called her mother's bank that same evening, the moment they understood. The wires, she was told, could not simply be reversed. A wire transfer is not like a credit card charge. When you wire money, you are authorizing the bank to send funds, and once those funds are received and withdrawn on the other end, they are, in the bank's language, gone. The institution could attempt a recall, a request to the receiving bank to send the money back, but a recall is a request, not a command, and it only works if the money is still sitting there. By the time the family called, the accounts on the other end had already been swept clean, drained and closed within hours of each transfer, the way these operations always work. Then came the harder blow. The family asked whether the bank bore any responsibility, whether the institution should have flagged a 77-year-old customer suddenly wiring tens of thousands of dollars to unfamiliar accounts over 2, days, draining a savings account and triggering a retirement withdrawal. Surely that pattern should have set off something. The bank's position, conveyed over the following weeks, was straightforward and devastating. Marlene had authorized every transaction herself. She had walked into the branch. She had confirmed the wires. When asked, she had told the bank the money was for home repairs and real estate. The transfers were not unauthorized. They were authorized by her, the account holder, acting on instructions she believed were real. And under the rules that govern these things, a transfer the customer authorized, even one the customer was tricked into authorizing, is generally treated very differently from a transfer a criminal makes without permission. The bank had not been hacked. The account had not been breached. The customer had said yes. That distinction, authorized versus unauthorized, is the single most important and least understood thing about scams like this, and it is why I am stopping the story to explain it. When a thief steals your card number and buys a television, that is an unauthorized transaction, and the law gives you strong protection. But when a thief convinces you to send the money yourself to walk to the bank, fill out the wire form, and click confirm, many of those protections fall away. On paper, you are not a victim of theft. On paper, you made a payment. The fraud lives entirely in the lie that convinced you, and the lie does not show up on the transfer record. The bank sees a customer who chose to send money. It does not see the synthetic voice of a grandson sobbing in a jail cell at 5:42 inches the morning. The police were next. Diane filed a report with the Cedar Glen Department, who were sympathetic and largely powerless. The accounts were untraceable shells. The phone numbers were spoofed. The courier who collected the first envelope was almost certainly a hired runner who knew nothing. The money had very likely already moved overseas, converted and layered through accounts in jurisdictions where no local detective would ever follow. They took the report. They added it to a file. They told the family, honestly, that recovery was unlikely and that an arrest was even less so. A crime had clearly occurred. And yet there was no one to arrest, no money to seize, and no institution that considered itself responsible. Marlene had lost more than $100,000 to a documented fraud, and the formal answer from every direction was a version of the same sentence. "We're very sorry, but there's nothing we can do." Before we continue, if this story is making your stomach turn, that is exactly the point. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It genuinely helps these warnings reach more people. And if you have a parent, a grandparent, or anyone older in your life, share this with them. One conversation about exactly this kind of call can stop the same thing from happening to someone you love. I've also put together a free scam-proof family checklist that lays out the precise warning signs in this case, the secrecy demand, the courier pickup, the escalating fees, the don't trust anyone but us. Grab it through the link below. It's free, and it could be the most important thing you hand your family this year. Now, you're probably thinking the loss stopped at $103,000, that the discovery, however brutal, at least ended the bleeding. It didn't, and the way it continued is the most disturbing part of this entire case. About 10 days after the discovery, after the police report, after the bank's denial, after Marlene had stopped sleeping, the phone rang again. A different number, a different, polished voice. The man said he was a fraud recovery specialist with an asset recovery firm that worked alongside financial institutions and law enforcement to trace and reclaim funds lost to international wire fraud. He knew details. He knew Marlene's name, the approximate amount she'd lost, the fact that it involved wires to overseas accounts. He was reassuring, knowledgeable, and seemed to understand her case better than anyone she'd spoken to. His firm, he explained, specialized in exactly this, the recovery of funds from grandparent scams and impersonation fraud. They had relationships with the foreign banks. They could freeze and claw back the money, but it required acting quickly, before the funds were laundered beyond reach. The process involved fees. Of course, a recovery of this size required posting what he called a release bond with the foreign institution, plus the firm's processing costs, but those fees were a fraction of what she stood to recover. He was talking about getting most of the money back, and Marlene, drowning, grasped the rope. Understand the cruelty of what was happening. This is a recognized and vicious pattern, and it is the second betrayal at the heart of this story. Scam victims are routinely targeted a second time by recovery scammers, sometimes by the very same criminal organizations that robbed them the first time. The original scam generates a list. People who have proven they can be manipulated, who have money, and who are now desperate to get it back. That desperation is more exploitable than the original fear. A drowning person will pay anything for a rope, and the recovery scam sells the rope back to the person who is drowning, knowing there is nothing on the other end of it. The recovery firm's release bond was $38,000. They needed it wired before the foreign bank's deadline. And on top of that came a series of follow-up fees, each one unlocking the next stage of the supposed recovery, each one accompanied by official-looking documents emailed to her letterhead, case references, a confirmation that her funds had been located and frozen and were awaiting release. It was the original scam all over again, with the same architecture. Solve one problem, reveal the next. Never reach the bottom. Marlene, who could not bear to believe she had lost everything, who needed the recovery to be real because the alternative was unthinkable, paid and paid. She drained what remained of the retirement account, and when that was not enough, she did the thing that turned a catastrophe into a ruin. She took out a loan against the house she and Frank had paid off in 1994. The house that was supposed to be the one thing she could never lose. She did it quietly, the way she'd done everything else, because she was ashamed now, and because some part of her still believed that if she just finished the process, the money, all of it, would come flooding back, and no one would ever have to know how close she'd come to losing it. By the time Diane discovered the second round, and she discovered it the same way she'd discovered the first, by noticing her mother was lying to her, the recovery scam had taken another $208,000. Added up. The first scam, $103,800. The recovery scam, $208,000 and change. Together, just over $312,000. $312,000. The savings, the pension, the retirement, and now a lien against a house she owned free and clear, taken out to chase money that had never existed, offered by the same kind of people who had stolen it in the first place. That is how a careful woman loses everything. Not in one blow, in a series of them, each one designed to make the last one feel survivable until she looked up and there was nothing left to lose. There is a version of this story that ends with justice, and I wish I could tell you that one. When the case finally became public, when a regional news investigation picked it up, when Diane began speaking openly about what had happened to her mother, things did move a little. The publicity prompted the bank to review the file again. After the story aired, the institution agreed to refund a portion of the losses, citing what it described as a goodwill resolution. Not because it admitted fault. Because the story was now public, and a 77-year-old retired librarian losing her home to a voice-cloning scam is not the kind of headline a bank wants attached to its name. The portion they returned was real, and it mattered, but it was a fraction. It covered the first scam, more or less the authorized wires they could plausibly have flagged. It did not touch the recovery scam losses, which the bank considered entirely outside its responsibility. Payments Marlene had made knowingly to a third party. The lien on the house remained. The retirement account remained empty. As for the criminals, the people behind Mr. Brennan and Mr. Ashford and the warm-voiced recovery specialist, no one was ever arrested. The investigation confirmed what the police had said at the start. The operation was almost certainly run from overseas, using spoofed numbers, shell accounts, and money mules who never knew the full picture. The voice clone of Jordan, built from videos he had posted for fun, was never recovered because there was nothing physical to recover. It was code. It had done its job, and it was gone. A crime had happened. Everyone agreed a crime had happened, and no one was ever held to account for it. Marlene Cooper kept her house. In the end, Diane and her husband took over the loan payments, and the family closed ranks to make sure she would not be put out on the street. But the money that was supposed to carry her through her final years, the cushion Frank had spent a working life building, the inheritance she had wanted so badly to leave to the grandchildren she loved, that was gone, and it was not coming back. The hardest part, Diane has said, is not the money. It is what it did to her mother. The shame. The way Marlene flinches now when the phone rings. The way a woman who spent 31 years as the steadiest person in any room now second-guesses every decision, apologizes constantly, asks if she's being foolish before she says almost anything. They took her savings. But they also took something harder to name: the quiet confidence of a person who had always trusted her own judgment and now never will again. So let me leave you with the warning signs, because Marlene would want me to. These are the things that, if you know them, can break the spell before it costs you anything. First, the demand for secrecy is the scam. Any caller, even one who sounds exactly like someone you love, who tells you not to involve the rest of your family, not to tell your daughter, not to answer calls from anyone but them, is isolating you on purpose. A real emergency invites the family in. A scam locks them out. The instant someone says don't tell anyone, that is your signal to call everyone. Second, hang up and call back on a number you already have. A real grandson, a real lawyer, a real anything can be reached by calling the number you trust. If the voice on the phone gives you a reason you can't do that, he's in a cell, the line is monitored, there's no time that reason is the trap. Hang up. Call your grandson directly. Call his mother. The voice will not let you do this, and that is the proof. Third, a voice is no longer proof of identity. This is the new and frightening truth that Marlene's case teaches. The sound of someone's voice, even crying, even using your private nicknames, can now be faked from a few seconds of audio. Agree on a family password, a word or a question only the real person would know, and use it the moment any call involves urgency and money. Fourth, no legitimate legal process is paid by courier, gift card, or same-day wire to an escrow account. Bail goes through a court clerk. Settlements take weeks, and lawyers and signatures. If anyone is collecting cash from your home within the hour to make a criminal charge disappear, it is a crime in progress, the one being committed against you. And fifth, if you have already lost money, no one can recover it for an upfront fee. The recovery specialist is the second wolf. Real law enforcement does not charge you to get your money back. Anyone who calls promising to reclaim what you lost, especially if they already know the details of your loss, is very likely the same operation, coming back for the rest. Marlene heard a voice she had loved for 23 years, and she did exactly what love told her to do. So, here is the question to sit with tonight. If your phone rang before dawn, and it was the voice of someone you would die to protect, crying, scared, begging you to help and to tell no one, how certain are you that you would hang up? If you want more cases like this, subscribe to Real Scams Uncovered. A new investigation drops every week. And take the free scam-proof family checklist in the description. It's free, no catch. Watch it, then send it to someone you love, and ask them tonight to pick a family password. It is the simplest thing in this entire story, and it would have stopped all of it.